Welcome in and welcome aboard another episode of A Show to Be Named Later. Thanks so much for dropping in and joining us today. A great show for you, whether you found us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, radio.com, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Maybe you follow me on Twitter at SethGoldberg17 or like my Facebook page, Seth Goldberg Sports. And you can also find us today on YouTube. You can see us while we do the show, and you can see our guest today, a great guest on today's show. He is a world champion. He is an AL Cy Young Award winner. He is a six-time MLB All-Star. He is Yankee great CC Sabathia joining us on the show, and he's got a new documentary coming up within the week called Under the Grapefruit Tree, the CC Sabathia story. You can check it out on Tuesday, December 22nd at 9 p.m. on HBO and HBO Max. And I'm really looking forward to that, hearing more about CC's story. We got into that quite a bit here as we talk with him. Really hope you enjoy the conversation. I loved talking with a guy that I'm a huge fan of. And after that, I want to talk a little college football. Got to talk about something that Brian Kelly, Notre Dame's head coach, said that I just don't buy it. But first, here's CC Sabathia, Yankee great, on A Show to Be Named Later. Our guest today is a six-time MLB All-Star, a Cy Young Award winner, and on Tuesday he has a new documentary out, Under the Grapefruit Tree, the CC Sabathia story. You can see it on HBO and HBO Max at 9 o'clock Tuesday, December 22nd. CC Sabathia joining us. CC, thanks so much for the time. How have you been? How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start off with the documentary. What makes you want to make this film? What makes you want to put out a documentary like this?
I wanted to put out the doc, honestly, I didn't really want to, when we first started filming, I wasn't thinking about a documentary. I would just want to document my last year. And, I felt like I was coming up on some pretty cool numbers, 250 wins, 3,000 strikeouts, and thought it'd be cool to document that for the kids. While we were filming, we thought it'd be cool to kind of tell this story of my career and, the story of my dad, me battling addiction and all of that stuff. You can't really tell the end of the story without, you knowing the whole thing. So, that's where the inspiration came. HBO, we know, does great work. And I was just excited that they were interested in the stuff that we had already filmed and, turned it into one of their original pieces. So, I couldn't be happier with the way it turned out. Partnering with HBO and MLB, it's just been a blessing. So I'm excited for people to see this on Tuesday.
Can't wait to watch it, and I certainly want to circle back to it at the end. But this is a question I like asking all athletes or former athletes. When did you know you were better at this than other people? When did you know you had a future in baseball?
The summer I turned 14. When I was 14, I come from a town that had really, really good baseball talent, really, really good. And by the time I was 14, I was probably the best in the city. And for me, saying that from Vallejo is a big deal. So, I just woke up one summer and I was like, man, I'm pretty good at this. And then I was like, I'm better than a lot of people at this. And then it just kind of, that confidence just kind of grew. So, I think about 14 years old.
I want to fast forward a little bit because you have those great years with the Indians, but one of the first things that comes to mind, and I'm a Yankee fan, but one of the first things that comes to mind when I see your name and hear your name is what you did in 2008 with the Brewers. Can you take me through what those couple of months were like when you were just, and particularly in September and October, it seemed like you were pitching every other day and really pushing to get into the playoffs when you had a contract, up at the end of the season. And I'm sure there are a lot of pitchers who wouldn't necessarily push in that situation the way you did.
Yeah, I mean, being in that situation, that was a lot of fun getting traded over there in the summer of 2008. It was so many great guys there. It was a young Ryan Braun, Prince Fielder, Ricky Weeks, Billy Hall, Craig Counsell was on that team, Mike Cameron. We had a fun group of guys that I just felt like I was just playing summer ball with the guys, you know what I'm saying? And didn't want the season to end. And, Sheeter was a little banged up. Giovanni was coming off knee surgery, and we were short, and I felt healthy, and, I was feeling good. Obviously, I was in, the prime of my career. I was 28 years old at that time, and, I came up with a pretty good routine where I would pitch, take a day off, play catch, and then pitch. It was just one of those things where, It just started feeling natural to me. So, I was feeling good enough to be able to take the ball, and I honestly thought, people kept saying, he's the contract at the end of the year, free agency, all of that stuff. But in my mind, to be honest, I was thinking the more times I get out here and pitch while I'm feeling good, the more money I'm going to make. So that's kind of that was the thinking behind it, to be honest.
It was a win-win for sure, and you
It
end
was
up
a win-win.
you end up coming to New York. Actually, 12 years ago today was your press conference at the old Yankee Stadium, one of the last events at the old Yankee Stadium, probably. What do you remember about that when you and AJ are introduced together?
You know what? I remember about the night before, me, AJ, and our wives and Jason Zillow went out to dinner, and I begged AJ to do the press conference with me because I was going to do it alone. And I was like, I begged him because it was going to be my first time in front of the New York media. You know what I mean? California guy. I was scared to death. Just signed this big, huge contract, richest pitcher in MLB history, and I didn't want to do the press conference alone. So I begged AJ the night before to do the press conference with me, and that just kind of became like our relationship. It kind of took off from there, and we've been close ever since. But yeah, the biggest thing when I see that press conference is people don't really know how nervous I was and how much I needed AJ to be there for sure.
Certainly didn't show that on the day of or in the video I just saw come across my Twitter timeline. Looking at some of the guys that you joined that team with, and looking specifically at two guys who just got into the Hall of Fame, Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera. What was the biggest difference in playing with them versus playing against them? Kind of what you thought of them versus what they were when you got in the room with them.
I don't think there was any difference. I mean, what kind of character these guys have, and you hear all the stories about how they worked hard. I think the biggest thing for so much, in the Indians and the Brewers, forever, or for start opening day and all that stuff. I come here and I'm behind Andy, and obviously Mo where I don't run sprints. Like, I don't run in the outfield or do any of that stuff. Like, I don't even bring my shoes out there. I do PFP and I come back in. So the very first day, we go out and I do my PFP and I come back in, but I see, like, as I'm walking in, I see Andy and Mo grabbing their shoes to go run. So as I'm walking in, I'm like, damn, what should I do? Like, should I go in here and do cardio inside, or should I grab my shoes, come back out and run? So I went in the locker room, grabbed my shoes, came back outside and started running. These guys had already had 4 rings, and if they can go out and run and do the things that, the young players do, then who am I to not follow them? So it just shows you the culture of the Yankees and how hard people work, and these titles don't come easy. You know what I'm saying? People work for these things, and that was the first lesson I learned the very first day when I got over here.
That 09 postseason, the first ring for you, the fifth for those guys. It was you, it was AJ, it was Andy going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What was that postseason like? What was it like when you guys came up with the plan to just roll with the three of you and knowing you would be on short rest and taking the ball that often?
For me, it was just, second nature because I had did it the year before. And to be honest, I was going to do that anyway. I don't know if AJ and Andy were going to necessarily pitch on 3 days rest, but if they weren't, then I was going to do it. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to have to try to figure out the rotation around that because I was taking the ball every 3 days, no matter what. And luckily enough, those guys felt healthy enough to be able to do it, and it worked out for us. We were able to move Jabba and Phil Hughes to the bullpen, and we were going deep in those games. Andy pitched every clincher on 3 days rest, and it worked out for us.
That's a wild stat that he clinched all 3 rounds of the playoffs.
He clinched all 3 rounds.
You bring up Andy Pettitte, and I think I've heard you talk about it before, but your transformation from what you were early and even into the beginning of your Yankee years to what you were later with the Yankees. How big of an influence did Andy have on that? How much were you talking to him about what kind of a pitcher you would ultimately become in your last year?
No, he definitely had a huge influence on me changing. He had a huge influence on me being able to navigate New York and being able to pitch in the Bronx for as long as I did. I mean, he had a huge influence on it. Obviously, him teaching me the cutter, and really the last third of my career, I turned into him. I'm throwing backdoor sliders, cutters, and changeups, and two seamers, never any four seamers. So to be able to have a mentor like that, a big brother like that, and be able to watch him go out and do things the right way, and watch him be the great teammate that he was, and a great mentor, and can talk to anybody about anything. It was a blessing to be able to have him. Through those years, even too, battling addiction. He's somebody that I leaned on big time. So, yeah, I mean, it was awesome to be able to have a chance to play with him and pitch with him, and to have a friendship with him now.
A couple more before we wrap things up here. I know tonight we're talking on a Friday. Tonight you're on your way you're going to call the Nets preseason game. We've seen the podcast that you do with Ryan Ruocco, and you're calling the game with him. Are we going to see you guys on a Yankee game? What's the future of you in the broadcasting world?
Not if I got to wear a suit. But no, me and Ruocco, we have a lot of fun, and obviously we do the podcast together, and this opportunity came along, and I mean, if it was with anybody else, I wouldn't do it. But, I know that, he's going to take care of me and make it easy for me. So I'm excited to head down there. And I have a suit on today because, I always said that I wouldn't put a suit on to call baseball games. But I would definitely do it to call basketball games for sure.
Love it. Love it. And CC, last thing, we got about a minute left. What are you hoping for people to get out of the film when it's debuted on Tuesday?
I think just for me, I hope that, if somebody's watching it that needs help or, is battling addiction, that they can go out and get help. I think the hardest thing about, actually facing addiction is actually admitting that you need help or actually facing the problem. For the longest time, I wouldn't admit that I was an alcoholic. And once I did, I was able to get help. And really the last 5 years of my life have been great because I was able to get that help. So, when people say that, when addicts say that once you get sober, that your life changes and it changes for the better. I never believed that until actually now I'm sitting here on this side of it. So I'm hoping that somebody can watch this doc and get some help that they need for sure.
It's a great message. CC, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it. And as a Yankee fan, thanks for all the great years.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, so my thanks again to CC Sabathia. A thrill to talk to him as a Yankee fan, as somebody who absolutely loved that 2009 team. I can tell you exactly where I was, and I can tell you long stories about where I was when the Yankees won the World Series. I was in the now very much closed ESPN zone in Times Square watching that game. Along with Yankee fans from all over New York and all over who knows where that happened to be in New York City that night, and then went to the parade. So I'm a huge fan of CC Sabathia's, and it was a thrill to get to talk to him today. As mentioned, I want to get to some college football. I want to talk about what Brian Kelly had to say earlier. And if you have not seen this already, Brian Kelly said some things that I just don't truly believe. I just don't buy it. I will call his bluff here, as Brian Kelly says, I'm not sure we'll play in the playoffs if the parents can't be there. Now, if you haven't seen, this is all about the Rose Bowl. This all has to do with the Rose Bowl hosting a semifinal and the idea that Pasadena and the Los Angeles area are not allowing fans in the stands because of COVID. It makes a whole lot of sense. You see the Pac-12 championship game on Friday night. There are no fans anywhere around the LA Coliseum. Look, it doesn't make sense to have crowds. It doesn't make sense to put people in that position. So don't, right? I tend to think that's a very responsible thing to do. Football coaches aren't happy about it. Football coaches are, in my opinion, unreasonably unhappy about this development. And when you look at the reality of the situation, the reality is that it just doesn't make sense to put fans in the stands. But put that aside. Let's take what Brian Kelly says on face value. Brian Kelly says that if parents of players and family members of players are not allowed to go to the game, then Notre Dame's not going to play for a national championship. Now, think about how ridiculous this is. In a year in 2020 where teams are not going to bowl games, where teams are deciding, hey, not worth the check, not worth it, right? To sit through another quarantine for another 3 weeks, not worth it to put our players through this and, to extend this stay. And, it's not worth the mental health, the mental well-being and the stress that it causes on our players. I get it for the Pinstripe Bowl. I get it for the Sun Bowl, which got canceled, or, the Independence Bowl. I understand it if you're Boston College, if you're Wake Forest, if you're Florida State. I get it. Don't play in those games. It makes sense. But I never thought that you would see a team say, we're not going to play for the national title. We're not going to play in a college football playoff. And that's why I just don't believe Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly is too competitive. I think Brian Kelly's players are too competitive to pass up that opportunity. We've talked about this in the past, and I don't think it's too dissimilar. But we've talked about this in the past when it comes to players opting out of bowl games, generally speaking, right? Big picture. Remember Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey. Guys have done it, throughout the years. But those are the two big names who did it first. And they were killed for it. And it was asked, hey, if you made the BCS championship, if you made the college football playoff, would you guys be doing this? And the answer is probably not. If you made the New Year's Six Bowl, hey, Christian McCaffrey, if your Stanford team was playing in the Rose Bowl rather than whatever bowl you were playing in, would you have skipped this game? The answer is probably not. And so I think that the same happens this year. Could Notre Dame skip a bowl game? Yeah, of course they could. I think it's more likely they skip a bowl game if they get absolutely throttled by Clemson and find themselves falling out of the college football playoff. They're not going to give up a chance to play for a national title. And so I just can't take what Brian Kelly says seriously. I can't take that statement as an actual statement of fact. It's a total bluff. It's complete garbage. And I think that you have to look at that statement for what it is. Brian Kelly is trying to put pressure on the Rose Bowl people, on the city of Pasadena, on Los Angeles County and the area of the country that Pasadena and the Rose Bowl are in. And he's trying to put pressure on the College Football Playoff Committee to move that game somewhere else. And that's fine. He's well within his right to put that pressure on if he wants to. But to call out and say, hey, we're not going to play, just feels like a bold-faced lie. It feels disingenuous. And it makes me feel kind of weird that you would go there, that that's the first place that you would go because family and friends can't get in. I just don't buy it. And on the other hand, would it be so terrible? Would it be so terrible if Notre Dame didn't play in the college football playoff? If Notre Dame wasn't in a high-profile bowl game? Considering their recent history in these games, considering their recent history in the BCS championship game, in the college football playoff, in the major bowls, would it be so awful if we slotted somebody else in their place? That was kind of my second thought. First one is Brian Kelly's full of it. They're going to play in the semifinals. But if not, maybe that's a good thing. So that'll do it for us today here on A Show to Be Named Later. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks so much for sticking around and joining us throughout the episode. Really enjoyed talking with CC Sabathia. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as well. Don't forget, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, Radio.com, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And look, you can check us out on YouTube as well. You can see my smiling face as I do the podcast, as I record the show. So thanks so much for dropping by. Don't forget, follow me on Twitter at SethGoldberg17 and on Facebook, Seth Goldberg Sports as well. We'll talk to you soon here on A Show to Be Named Later.